Walker talks about fawning as basically trying to reduce a threat by becoming more appealing to the threat. Now, when we talk about threat, when we're talking about complex PTSD in books like Pete Walker's book, is we're talking about threat often being our own caregivers, the people who raise us, who take care of us, who we spend time with, where we learned that one of the greatest ways to get our needs met was by becoming a more pleasant, appealing version to often unsafe caretakers in some way. Now, the unsafe could vary in many ways, from physical to emotional and mental, but the bottom line is that I'm going to wrap myself up with a big red bow to make it less likely for you to discard me. You're going to see me as an advantageous present to you in some way, and that will make you less likely to do the things that are emotionally and physically or mentally unsafe to me. So the problem is that fawning often basically becomes people-pleasing and really just being like too nice. It's not about being kind and generous. It's about doing something nice to be perceived as acceptable, pleasant, good in some way, as an act of self-protection. And oftentimes we don't even know we're doing it. And we think, that's not me. Like, I can speak my own needs, or I'm able to, ask for what I want, or yeah, I can be a caretaker or people pleaser, but I don't think I do that. And then realizing all the places in our lives where we do it. So let's go through some signs that you may not recognize are often fawning behaviors. And you might want to reflect these back to, well, why would I have had to develop that behavior in response to the types of caregivers you had? What purpose would it have served in childhood? Number one, the first sign is that you generally don't express what you want, and you often don't even know what you want. So when someone says, well, what do you want for dinner? You're like, I don't know. Well, do you want, Mexican food, or do you want Chinese food, or do you want, Japanese food, or whatever, German food? You're like, I don't know. You can't even really check in with yourself. Maybe you know what you want for dinner, but the bottom line is you often, or maybe you really did want Chinese food, but you would never really want to push it and say that, yeah, even though they're pushing for Mexican, you want Chinese, because in your mind that would be like you asking for too much. So you say you don't really care, and maybe you've taught yourself that you think you don't care, and you just go with the flow and do whatever. But if you could really check in, you might discover that what you want is something very different than what you often agree to. Number two, you don't ever really say what you feel. So you find yourself finding ways to keep your mouth closed and not have a comment, or to agree with somebody else. Or when someone asks you, well, what do you feel about that? You're like, I don't know. And maybe you know, and you don't want to say because it might be displeasing, or maybe you don't even know. So when it comes to expressing emotions, there's a big kind of wasteland there about what you really feel and need and who you are. Number three, you struggle to directly say no. So you make excuses, you lie, you avoid, you feel bad, like you're not allowed to say no to things, to people, to desires, to invitations, like whatever it is. Number four, you are more focused on protecting another person's state of mind, their ego, not making them feel bad, rather than expressing your own needs and boundaries, because for you, that would feel worse. So it's always more hurtful. You take the hit than ever wanting someone else to. Number five, you don't set or hold boundaries. So you can't necessarily say what's non-negotiable for you, what's okay for you. And even if you try to set a boundary, if someone disregards it, you have no idea how to hold it. So you end up being just like, okay, it's fine, I guess. Like, whatever, you can come too, even though you didn't really want that, for example. Number six, you feel like it's your job to make other people happy, more cheerful, fix their problems, help them regulate their emotions. This can often be from your childhood experience of rotating around a caregiver, But the bottom line is that, if you go in a room and people are kind of down, it's like your job to cheer them up. Or if someone's having a bad day, it's like it's your job to ask how they're doing and to help them solve the problem. Or if your mom or dad or caregiver is unhappy, it's your job to fix. You think it's your job to fix. You're a fixer. Number 7, you often walk around in a cycle of feeling like a constant resentment or hurt or like low-key annoyance or irritation or just dysregulated or rejected, but it's just no one really sees it. You're so used to bearing what you feel in the service of others, but deep inside you're often really struggling with a lot of feelings and responses to yourself and others and the world or whatever. Number 8, you often over-apologize. So you're always blaming yourself for other people's emotions. So it's always about what you did wrong, what you should change, or you should adjust, and you're always saying you're sorry for that, one way or the other. Number 9, you never really show up as your real self, and I would argue, in fact, if you're a true fawner, you may not know who that person is. It's a huge part of the work. If you don't even know who you are, how can you decide what your boundaries are, what you will and won't accept, things like that? Number 10, your value is in what a good caretaker you are. So you actively get a hit to your sense of self by being the good one, the helpful one, the loving one. But meanwhile, you're lacking reciprocity and mutuality in a lot of your relationships. Number 11, you have a chronic illness or a chronic mental health issue, or you're in a constant chronic state of trauma or being traumatized. And it's because you've sacrificed so much of yourself for others, and that maybe often, began in childhood, that your body is broken down from your excessive stress levels or your lack of self-care or neglect. Maybe you don't go to the doctor, but you make sure your partner does, things like that, or your kids do. So if this is you, how can you stop doing it? Number 1, you want to learn to recognize what your emotions are and what your needs are and how they show up in your body. So to begin to pay attention to, what does it feel like when I'm tired or fatigued? What does it feel like when I want to say no, but I'm saying yes? And there's a mismatch there or a disintegration. And then begin to challenge that and change your behavior or your thoughts or all of the above. Number 2, learn to pause and soothe and go back to tolerating the feelings beneath the urge to kind of like make everyone else okay. So basically, their displeasure creates a dysregulation in you that you want to get rid of quickly. And so you don't want to feel those feelings of, oh, what if someone's mad at me, or I'm not doing what they want, or they don't feel special, or whatever, or I'm not fixing their problems. And so you're trying to find ways to deal with that. So you go into kind of hyperactivation and caretaking, and you keep doing it. So you want to work on learning to pause and breathe and slow down, to tolerate those distressing feelings, to do some things like classic DBT skills to manage your emotions. The next one is number 3, learn to ask yourself, why am I doing this and who benefits? So all of this like fawning and what does everyone else need? What am I doing and who is this really serving and what is it doing for me? Number 4, is this how I want to show up for myself first? Maybe not, right? So if you could say my ideal way to show up in the world that takes into account my needs and others looks like X, Y, and Z. It doesn't look like always directing my focus to others. Number 5, what might I be doing like I did in childhood? So oftentimes we're repeating that trauma, right? So we learn that this sacrifice we make, it minimizes our own difficulties, our own pain, it makes us feel safer, whatever. But to try to make some like matches between where this behavior began and what the payoff is for you, because the truth is, even though we might not like how we're doing something, it's often doing something for us. It's reducing our anxiety. It's helping us avoid conflict, other people's unhappy emotions, things like that. Number 6 is setting boundaries, learning to communicate and express your needs. And the last one is, what am I repressing? How have I been trained to be so empathic or so helpful or so pleasing? And what are the feelings and the grief and the longings and desires below the surface? What did the child in me want and need? What does the adult want and need now? What happens when I stuff feelings? I always say it's like whack-a-mole. Like if I deny this feeling here, it pops up over there. So if I don't set boundaries over here, I'm chronically fatigued and exhausted and it pops up over here and being too tired to go to something I really wanted to do, things like that. So, but what is the core pain? where did this fawning behavior begin, and where do I want to work on it now in my adult life? So that is one way to look at your tendency to be so nice and so good isn't always a bad thing, but to understand that there's something about that can be very detrimental and damaging to your mental and physical health and relationships, and to work on changing that. So I hope that was helpful. Thank you so much for being here. Please stay safe and well, and I'll see you soon. Take care.